We're going to talk here about Ipconfig. This is one of the most well-known commands on the command line. It gives us information about our network setup. Ipconfig. This is the simple Ipconfig, and here is every network adapter listed on our machine. Now I have a lot of VirtualBox and VMware stuff on here, and so you're going to find a lot of virtual adapters as well as real adapters. But let's take a look at this one. This is the one I'm actually plugged into and using on the internet right now, Ethernet 2. I have two Ethernet adapters in my computer, and I'm plugged into Ethernet 2 right now. Here's some information about our IP version 6 addresses, our IP version 4 address, and then the default gateway. That's not a lot of information. We'd like to see more, so we can use the Ipconfig Slash All. We're going to do a space after Ipconfig, and then the /, and then the word all. This gives us even more information. If we go back up to Ethernet 2 adapter again, now you'll see that I have some information about my adapters, the MAC address, whether DHCP is enabled and whether it's set up to auto-configure my computer. Here's my IP version 6 address. This is my global unicast address. Then here is the lease obtained. So this is the date and time that I was assigned this IP version 6 address. And down here you'll see when it expires. Because when it expires, my computer will have to go back out to the DHCP server and ask for a new address. It will likely get the same old one again, but it actually, in IP version 6, I believe it typically gives me a different one. In IP version 4, it typically gives you the same one over again. Here's some more IP version 6 stuff. Here's our IP version 4 address again, the subnet mask, and then we have the lease date that it was my IP version 4 address was obtained, and then when it expires, and I'll have to go get a new one. Here's my default gateway, both in IP version 6 and in IP version 4, and that's at 10.0.0.1, which is my router. So my router is acting as my DHCP server as well as my default gateway. Here it is as my DHCP server, 10.0.0.1. These items down here, the IAID and the client DUID, these are just some information that DHCP uses to identify both your system and your network card. So we're not going to go into any detail about how those work and what those numbers mean, but you can look them up on your own. The DNS servers, so both my IP version 6 and my IP version 4 DNS servers are here, and then whether I have NetBIOS over TCP/IP enabled or not. So there's a lot of information, but that's certainly not all the information Ipconfig can give us. I'm going to type Ipconfig and then a space and then a / and a question mark. This gives me the help file on Ipconfig, and let's see what else it can do. We've already seen Ipconfig and Ipconfig all. The Ipconfig release command releases my IP version 4 address. In other words, it flushes it out of my system, and so my system will no longer have an IP version 4 address. The same thing for release 6, except for IP version 6. If I do Ipconfig renew, then it will force my system to go out and find a DHCP server and renew an IP version 4 address or an IP version 6 address. The Flush DNS command, Ipconfig / Flush DNS, will purge my DNS cache from my system. So it'll have to start all over again collecting new DNS cache. So if I had a bad DNS address, this will flush that out and allow it to renew by going through the DNS system, walking the tree in the DNS system. Register DNS will register my IP address and my computer name with the DHCP and the DNS server, so that the DNS server knows has recent good information about who my system is. Display DNS shows me the DNS cache that I have on my system. Now these items here, the class ID, I'm not going to get into these items here because really we don't use them very often. However, they do have to do with how the system interacts with my network card.